And then she took a break at 6:35, and she came back to eat at 6:50, and she went to sleep at 7.
So good. I love the way his brain went back to that word
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. I see those videos starting to pop on. Thank you so much. I know it's already been a full day for you guys, so I appreciate you guys coming back from lunch, being ready for some writing. Regardless of your role in your school, what we are going over today will be helpful for you to support your teachers. One thing I'm super thankful for today is the fact that we are doing meetings on Zoom, which I typically do not like at all. But I have been on a road show with my team this morning. We have been with 3 different groups. We have been with the middle school literacy leaders. We've been with the transformation literacy leaders, and now we're here with you guys. So thankfully, I didn't have to drive between 3 different locations, and I'm able to do this on Zoom, but we are definitely on a whirlwind of writing today. So I'm excited to get started with you guys. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just an update for those of you who did attend the text-based writing session in the December coach meeting. Some of this will be similar in the fact that we are going to kind of walk through the 6-step process again, but know that it's a completely new prompt, a new text set. It's one that's actually coming up in our lessons. And I think it's one you guys are going to be super excited about because it is connected to Black History Month. So we will be doing some assessment updates, a quick survey. Then we will go through the 6-step process, but we're going to really slow down and focus on steps 3 and 4 to show you what that looks like, continuing that emphasis and focus on really finding relevant evidence and then including that in our response. And then, of course, we'll end with some updates about upcoming PD that I know you guys are interested in. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. I have my 2 district coaches with me, Philomena Exius and Mandy Leathers. They're here. I'm so excited because you're going to get to hear from them today. It is not just going to be me for the next hour and a half. Philomena and Mandy are going to take part in facilitating today. If you haven't had the pleasure of meeting them at your school sites, they are fabulous, fabulous people, and I'm excited for them to be a part of this. All right. Can you guys see my PowerPoint? Yes, perfect. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to get rid of everything on the screen. So I just see the PowerPoint. So Philomena, Mandy, if something comes up in the chat or if there's some sort of glitch, you guys unmute and let me know. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to our text-based writing session at the January Literacy Coach meeting. Thank you guys so much for being here. Please know that we will have the recorded session on Canvas. So if you have coach friends or teachers or other resource teachers that weren't able to be here today, they will be able to access this on Canvas later on, along with all of the resources. So just a reminder about where we are going to put these resources. We are going to have them in the coach meeting icon on Canvas in our K-5 ELA teacher resource page. We'll have a new January section, and I'll go ahead and add all of these resources for you after today's meeting. So let's talk about what's coming up. Hopefully it's on your radar. I know you guys are kind of in the middle of iReady and Achieve and all of those good things, but mid-year writing is upon us very soon. So for grades 2 through 5, we have a window of administration from February 1st to the 26th. So when the change was made back in December, one of the things they did was not only push it a little bit further in the year, but also give a much longer window of time, really to make sure you guys had time to do all of those other content area assessments that are just as important to do with our students as well. The assessment office is really the one who's going to be able to answer specific questions regarding options for administration, meaning school city, paper copies, etc. I know some of you and even some APs have reached out to me with questions, and a lot of times I just have to refer them back to the assessment office, because when it has to do with assessments that are considered secure, they really have to kind of give the same response to all schools regarding how that can be done. So if you have specific questions around that, please have your AP reach out to Nicole Binder and the assessment office for those answers. Scores due in School City. So we will have the option to do scores in School City. The assessment office hadn't given me a date yet. I was kind of thinking in my head that it would be kind of like the second week of March would be the deadline. If you did the assessment early on in February, you could absolutely have them scored by the beginning of March. But if you waited until kind of the end of the window in February, then you would need at least that first week or two in March. I encourage you to do this as soon as possible, just because the longer you wait, then you have to score, and then you just have less and less time to really provide feedback, remediate, enrich as needed before our April FSA deadline. So just some things to consider when you're figuring out when to administer, how long it might take you to score. If I hear from assessment on that date, I'll make sure that I share it with you guys. 4th and 5th grades will use the FSA opinion rubric. Those rubrics are on Canvas. They can also be found on fsassessments.org. The district created grade level aligned rubrics for 2nd and 3rd grade can be used to score those grade levels. We do have opinion rubrics. They're also on Canvas. All of them, like I said, can be found there in Canvas. So you can take a screenshot of this, but you'll have this PowerPoint in Canvas as well. And I'm sure when the assessment information is shared with your APs, this information will be there. But these are the test IDs that you will use to enter the scores into School City. So even if your kids don't take the assessment in School City, they take it on paper, pencil, whatever, the scores can all be input in School City. This allows your principal, this allows your regional superintendents to be able to access that data and see growth between baseline and mid-year and things like that. So again, you can take a screenshot, or you'll be able to find this in Canvas later. And it also will be sent to your assistant principals. After the mid-year, so this is the same exact slide I showed you guys back in October when we discussed the baseline. So you will be allowed to conference and provide feedback on the mid-year, but we don't want it to be a model essay that you write with students, because we will eventually use the same prompt and topic with students. So what you can do is you can conference with them afterwards. You can provide them feedback. They can make revisions and edits based on your feedback. They can also help you determine trends to plan for your instruction or remediation. You can use different text sets and prompts to then model how to engage in that 6-step process. Keep your mid-year assessments on campus, collect them at the end of the year, and we'll have them destroyed due to possible future use again. So this is kind of the same information that's really been happening for years. So hopefully this isn't anything new. So once the mid-year writing assessment window of administration is closed and responses have been scored, teachers are encouraged to conference with students, provide feedback, use those responses to plan for instruction. One of the documents or tools we've shared with you this year that's also in Canvas, and I'll briefly review it again, is our trends analysis worksheet. And that's really helping you to kind of document and record trends that you identify in writing to determine next steps for instruction. So just a reminder, this is what that document looks like. You can change the statements on the left to kind of go with the mode of writing or the type of writing. And instead of making a list of what students did well, right? Because the idea is you hope the majority of your class did something, you're actually going to record which ones didn't do certain things. So if you've just got a couple kids in your class who still aren't unpacking the prompt and therefore it's affecting their response, you just quickly write down who are those students and what might you do about it or to help them better the next time. So here's an example. The students in my class that did not mark the text effectively for the prompt, that was Emma, Brian, Ethan, Sarah, Jose, and Mark. So I am going to go ahead and reteach them in a small group how to mark their text effectively. Emma, Brian, and Ethan were the only ones in my class, thank goodness, who did not include a clearly stated opinion. So I'm going to make sure that I discuss that with them while conferencing. And then just another quick example, did not include organized effective body paragraphs, all except Emily. So I know that my whole class needs some reteaching on organized effective body paragraphs. So that's really going to be much more instruction with a focus on steps 3 and 4 of the writing cycle. So just a quick idea of what this document looks like and how you can use it. Nancy, that question about available electronically, again, yes, it can be, but that's going to be something assessment can give you guidance on. I think they're going to have to access it through School City, but again, your AP can email assessment. All right, so with all of this mid-year talk said, I'd like you guys to grab your phone, and if you open your camera and hold it up to the screen, this survey should pop up. It's like a Microsoft Office form. It's very, very quick. I'll also put this up at the end. So if for some reason you can't access it right now, don't stress out, but I am gonna give you 3 or 4 minutes to click on this survey and to just quickly respond to the few questions about the mid-year assessment and about future meetings in there. So I'll give you a few minutes. Click on that survey, take your survey. If you don't know the answer, like I said, I'll show it again at the end, and I'll have you kind of open it then, and hopefully you'll be able to give a better response, or if you need to do it later, that's fine too. Oh, you don't have permission to view or respond. So I gave permissions to everyone in the organization, which should be everyone in SDHC. And Mandy and I both tried it earlier and it worked, but I see that it's not working for any of you guys. Well, okay, no worries.
Hey,
some of you.
It's working for me, but sometimes you have to, if you're doing it from your phone, sometimes you have to have already logged in through 365 so that it links up with your phone so that your phone recognizes that you're who is trying to access.
Yes, Rachel, you're absolutely correct. I think I remember that from the first time that I did one of these surveys. So I'm going to quickly tell you what the questions were. So if you can't access it and you want to shoot me a response in an email, you can do that. It was very simple. It was, is your school going to administer the mid-year writing assessment to 4th and 5th graders? Yes or no? Is your school going to administer mid-year writing to 3rd graders? Yes or no? And is your school going to administer mid-year writing to 2nd graders? Yes or no? So it was just those 3 questions. And then the last question was, what are some ideas or topics that you'd like to see covered in the February literacy coach meeting regarding writing specifically? So it was just, after today, what are some things that you might want me to touch on next week or at next month's meeting? And then is your school going to do mid-year for 4th and 5th, for 3rd and for 2nd? So super simple questions. Thank you for those who were able to get in. I'm going to move on. I'm going to show it again at the end. No worries, no stress. Okay, so Philomena is actually going to take over and she is going to walk us through a new prompt and a new text set And this is actually going to be the lesson that is given to you guys for the last 2 weeks in February to help celebrate Black History Month. This happens to be the 5th grade text set and prompt, but 4th grade is also going to get a text set that's similar with the same prompt. And we're going to kind of preview it right now and walk you through some of those more difficult, complex steps that we're seeing you have, and hopefully clarify some things for you guys. So Philomena?
I'm ready, Sharon.
All right, let me go ahead.
You can stay on there for just a second.
Yep.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Philomena Exius. For those of you that I've met and worked with, it's awesome to see you guys here today. For those of you that I have not had an opportunity to touch base with, I service mainly the South County, Riverview, Brandon, Seffner, Plant City area. So if you're in need of support, please feel free to reach out. Today, I'm going to walk you through step 1, step 2, and then the first half of step 3, where students are actually going to read the text as writers in order to find evidence. So beginning with step 1. Step 1 has students to unpack the prompt. This step is super important because this is the first opportunity that students will have in order to ensure that their writing is focused within the purpose, audience, and tasks as outlined by the FSA rubric. The strategy in which we've introduced to unpacking the prompt is to have students tap into their writing. TAP stands for task, audience, and purpose. The task is the topic or question students are to answer. The audience is who am I writing to? Sometimes the audience may be explicit if we're giving you some sample prompts. Oftentimes it is implied. So have students think about who would be interested in learning more information about the topic. That would be, of course, their target audience. And then last but not least, you have purpose. And for the sake of FSA style writing, we're only focused on writing to inform or writing to give an opinion. So as you can see, the prompt states, I have to move your face, Sharon. The prompt states, African Americans have made important contributions throughout history. After reading the Celebrate Black History passage set, write an essay in which you explain the characteristics of African American history makers who have made important contributions throughout history. Use information from the passages in your response. So we've underlined our purpose. It tells us that we're going to write to explain. And then we've boxed in our task. We're focused on characteristics of African American history makers. And then most importantly, these people have had to make an important contribution throughout history in order to be considered in our written response. All right, brainstorm. This is a new step as introduced to you guys back last semester. And this step is super important. This is the first opportunity students have in order to make connections to the text without actually having read the text first. This step connects when we talk about elaborative techniques later on in the slide presentation. So in order to brainstorm, students need to just quickly respond to the 3 guiding questions. What do you already know about the topic? What do you think about the topic? And then how do you feel about the topic? At this point, students don't know which African Americans they're going to be reading about. So this would be a great opportunity to tap into what they already know as it relates to African American history makers. So this could be some possible responses that students could come up with. Okay. Martin Luther King Jr., he was helpful because he fought for the freedom of others. You have Rosa Parks as a history maker. She was brave for not giving up her seat on the bus. Just recently, Kamala Harris is inspirational for being the first African-American woman to be vice president. And then you have Jackie Robinson, strong for being the first African-American baseball player in the major leagues. Now, the brainstorm process does not have to be this extensive. It's once again just an opportunity for students to connect with the topic before they actually read the text, because we know that one of those most important elements as it relates to the rubric is focused on those elaborative techniques. Okay, and this gives students an opportunity to later on write insight, reflect, and then of course extend the evidence that they're choosing beyond simply what the text is stating. All right, now this then takes us to step 3. We've read the prompt, so we have our focus, we know what our purpose is, we know who our audience is, and then of course we know what our task at hand is. Okay, we've had an opportunity to brainstorm just to make some connections to the text before we actually dive into the text itself. Now, step 3 has us to read to write. So we need to turn on our reading brain as writers. The most important part of reading the text as a writer is to keep the students focused on the question that they're trying to answer based upon the prompt. So I'm looking mainly for those contributions that the African American made as a history maker. Now, here's some guiding questions. Based on the prompt, you want to ask students what evidence are they looking for? They need to determine how they will mark the text. They can underline if they're going to use a symbol or a letter to indicate something specific about what they have marked, what is going to be that symbol or of course letter. Okay, and the answers to those questions would be, so based on the prompt, they're looking for characteristics of African American history makers. Students should know, or maybe characteristics should be a word that goes up on your word wall and you want to, of course, give some examples of what characteristics are, but they are qualities or traits, and the prompt says they are history makers, so I can look for details that show what they did to make history or how they made important contributions throughout history. And of course, you can have the students mark the text by underlining, or they can label the evidence that they find with a C to indicate these are the characteristics or contributions. Now, this will be the text set that students will be focused on, okay? So source 1 focuses on Sojourner Truth, source 2 focuses on Thurgood Marshall, and then source 3 focuses on York. For the sake of time today, we're just going to go through the process of reading the text as writers, focused on source 1 and source 2, just a couple of chunks from each source. And then, of course, source 3 would be the source that you can release students independently to work on, or even to work on within their groups or as partners. Okay, so it says we're going to read the first few paragraphs of source 1. Think about where students might mark evidence to show what the famous African American did to make history, or how they made contributions throughout history. Okay, can you guys see paragraphs 1 through 5 okay on the screen? I'm guessing yes. Awesome. All right. I'm going to go ahead and just read the first 5 chunks. And what I want you guys to do in the chat is just to think about places where students would have underlined evidence or the pieces of evidence that answers the questions from the prompt. Okay, so in thinking about what did that famous African American do to make history, or how did they make contributions throughout history? Okay, and you can just leave your evidence in the chat. Please indicate which paragraph number, so you can put a 2- and then whatever the evidence states. Please feel free to paraphrase. Here we go. Sojourner Truth. Isabella Baumfree was born in New York in 1797. She later changed her name to Sojourner Truth. Her parents were both enslaved. So were her siblings. During that time, slave owners bought and sold people like property. When Isabella was 9, she was sold away from her family. As a child, Isabella spoke only Dutch. At first, she could not understand things people said to her in English, but she was smart and learned English quickly. She was bought and sold several more times. She married an enslaved man and they had 5 children. Because Isabella was enslaved, her children became the property of the slave owner. She constantly worried about her children's safety. Around 1825, she escaped with her infant daughter to the home of Isaac and Maria Van Wagenen. The Van Wagenens did not believe in slavery. They paid money to a slave owner so Isabella and her baby could be set free, but her other children were still enslaved. One of her children, Peter, was sold to a slave owner in another state, which was illegal. Isabella took the case to court. She won, and Peter was returned to New York. She became the first African-American woman to win a lawsuit in the United States. In 1843, Isabella changed her name to Sojourner. Sojourner means a person, I can't see because the chat is popping up,
who temporarily lives in a place. Sojourner began to work with abolitionists. She also worked for women's rights. She could not read nor write, yet she became a preacher and an impressive public speaker who fought for the rights of women and African Americans.
Thank you. All right, so if you haven't done so, I'm going to give you on time just about 2 minutes. Any place where you feel like students would have marked the text in response to the question of the prompt, go ahead and drop that information into the chat. So lots of people have underlined from paragraphs 2 and 3. She escaped, she was brave. From paragraph 4, she won the lawsuit. First woman to win the lawsuit. Paragraph 5, advocated for others. Lots of text evidence in paragraph 4. All right. Okay, as you can see coming up on the screen, these are just some of the different pieces of evidence that students could have marked, and we indicated the evidence marked with a C. Okay, so it definitely aligns with what you all were dropping in the chat itself. Now, if I were doing this process in the classroom, I would have slowed it down just a bit more, maybe going every 2 paragraphs and then giving students an opportunity to mark the tags and then indicate the places in which they have marked, maybe not doing 5 paragraphs all at once. But it just depends on where your students are within the process itself. If they're ready to tackle the text on their own, then by all means, we want to release them in order to do so. All right. Now, there are more paragraphs in source 1. You would have students read with the partner, read independently to continue marking the text, but we're going to go ahead and move on to source 2. Okay, we're going to do the same process with source 2. Read the first few paragraphs of source 2. Think about where students might mark evidence to show what the famous African American did to make history or how they made contributions throughout history itself. Source 2 is focused on Thurgood Marshall. Here's what it states. Thurgood Marshall was born in 1908 in Maryland. His name was actually Thorogood, but in 2nd grade, he shortened it to Thurgood. He did well in school, but often got into trouble for talking too much in class. When Thurgood Marshall acted up in class, his school principal would send him to a quiet place and give him papers to study. What kind of papers? The United States Constitution. The Constitution describes the country's government, basic laws, and the rights of its citizens. As he read, Marshall realized that something was wrong. The Constitution says that all citizens have equal rights. But when Marshall was growing up, Black people were discriminated against in Southern states. They were not given the same rights as white people. He wanted to learn more about the laws of the land. Thurgood's father liked to go to courtrooms and listen to law cases, and Marshall often went with him. Learning about the Constitution and seeing the court cases made Thurgood want to become a lawyer. He wanted to make the promise of equal rights for all come true. It takes many years of college and law school to become a lawyer. After college, Marshall wanted to go to the University of Maryland Law School. He had good grades, but the school would not let him in because of the color of his skin. That did not stop Thurgood Marshall. He studied law at Howard University and finished first in his class. Sharon, can you finish off that last paragraph for me, please?
Yes, ma'am. Thurgood's first major court case was in 1935 when he represented an African-American student named Donald Gaines Murray. Like Marshall, Murray was not allowed to study law at the University of Maryland because of the color of his skin. Thurgood Marshall won the case, and Donald Murray became the first African-American to graduate from that school.
Very good. All right, you guys, 2 minutes. If you haven't done so, I see that some of you have already given some evidence in the chat. Go ahead and indicate where students could have marked evidence from source 2. So many have indicated he discovered injustice within the Constitution, first African-American to win lawsuit in the US. He wanted to make the promise of equal rights for all come true, became a lawyer. He went to law school, determined to study law, wanted to learn more about the laws of the land, wanted to become a lawyer, promise of equal rights and opportunities, finished first in his class, won the case for Donald Murray. You're all on the same thinking wave as we are. Sharon, can you bring up those responses? There we go. So lots of evidence from paragraph 10, paragraph 11, as you guys indicated in the chat, paragraph 12, and paragraph 13. Now, you would then release students once again to complete source 2, and then maybe have them read independently source 3 and mark the text. Focus once again on reading the text as a writer and making sure that they're connecting with that question from the prompt itself. I'm now going to give the platform back to Sharon, and she's going to walk you through the second part of step 3 and move on to step 4.
Awesome. Thank you, Philomena.
Welcome.
So one of the things that we've introduced to you guys in elementary this year is this idea of what do you do between when you just finished reading and marking or coding the text and actually determining what to put on your plan and in your response. And it's this idea that we want to teach students how to critically think, how to analyze, how to synthesize that evidence. And let me tell you guys, this is why the writing component of the FSA ELA is the only Webb's depth of knowledge level 4 on the entire assessment, is the writing component. It's the only one, and this is why. Because we are asking students to not only read 2, 3, or 4 passages about a topic that they may or may not be familiar with, we're asking them to respond in a mode of writing, either opinion or informative. We don't know which one they're going to get that day. They have to be ready and prepared for both. And we're asking them to do it effectively. We're asking them to not just write a summary of every little detail they've just read. We're asking them to either really strategically explain something and back it up with original thought and insight, or we're asking them to really strategically pick a side on something, give an opinion, and then add their elaboration and insight and original thought to it. So this is the step, you guys, that being a writing coach for the last 10 years, Philomena and Mandy have been writing coaches for that long. We've been writing teachers for 16, 17 years, and we were still seeing 8th graders struggle with this. So this is the step that we've really built into the process that, yes, is going to take some time to get used to, and it's going to take some time to really figure out how to tweak it and make it work for you and your students. But it's absolutely 100% the step that's going to help them and take them to that next level. And I have some rubric language that I'm going to bring up in this next section where I'm really going to explain to you why we do some of the things that we're doing with this particular step. Hopefully that'll clear things up for you. I was with the transformation coaches just 30 minutes ago. And one of the coaches, which you guys I'm sure know, Marlene Caesar, she unmuted her mic and she was able to kind of give us some tips and tricks of how she's kind of made this step work for her students. So along the way, I'll share that with you as well. So let's talk. Hopefully you guys know and are aware that every student receives this planning sheet the day of the assessment. It's typically pale yellow. The front looks exactly like this. It says planning sheet. It has a box with lines and it says it will not be scored. The back of this sheet of paper is completely blank. So what we want to teach students to do is to use this paper to their advantage. Use this paper to make notes, to do your planning, to really help you determine and make decisions to craft and draft your best response. So a lot of times kids see this box and think that they should start writing their essay right here. And then 120 minutes is up before you know it, and they haven't written their essay where it actually is supposed to be written. So one of the ways we can kind of avoid that is by having them do something else in this box. So we have them organize and record their evidence on the front of the planning sheet. For this particular text set, we have 3 sources, each about a different famous African-American history maker. So when we record our evidence, we're just going to do a very simple 3-column chart to record that evidence, and I'll show you what that looks like. If it's an informative prompt like this one, however, it may be asking them for 2 different things to look for. So this one is just asking us for characteristics, so we're only marking characteristics or contributions. But you could have an informative prompt that says, write an informative essay about the pros and cons of school lunch, right? So it's still informative, but it's asking them to write about pros and cons. So then they might do a T-chart and do pros on one side and cons on the other side. So it really depends on the prompt and what it's asking them to do to kind of determine if it's going to be a T-chart or a 3-column chart or whatever. That's why you kind of have to practice this with kids. Now, if it's an opinion, like we did in December when we did the science planet unit, one side said inner planets and one side said outer planets, or it might just be a yes, we should have PE in school, or no, we shouldn't have PE in school. And then that's how they would record their evidence. Remember, this recording step, while it is something extra, we don't want it to take a ton of time. So they're just using the paragraph number and a word or phrase either from the evidence or about the evidence to kind of serve as that roadmap. So I'll walk you through this process. This is where we're really gonna dig deep and spend some time today, because the more you see it, the more it becomes clear and the easier it is for us to kind of translate that to our students. So this is what my completed recorded evidence chart would look like after I read all 3 of those sources. So I know you guys only read the first few paragraphs of source 1, you only read the first few paragraphs of source 2. So I'm going to give you a few minutes and I want you to read through these pieces of evidence. It's just this quick little word or phrase about it. And I want you to just pay attention. What type of evidence are you seeing about the first person, the second person, and the third person? So I'm going to stop talking for a minute and I want you to just read through these pieces of evidence. So before we get into the sorting and categorizing, this is where one of the tips that Marlene gave this morning came in. So the way we've been writing our lesson plans is we've been having you read and mark evidence on one day, and then the next day completing this chart with the evidence that you marked. One of the things Marlene said that she's done to kind of tweak the process is that they record the evidence after each source. So it kind of makes it a little less daunting at the end because they're doing it by source. I love that she shared that, because what I actually in turn shared with her was that in middle school, we actually do this step simultaneously as we read. We teach our students to, every time they read a paragraph and they find a piece of evidence, to go ahead and put it on their chart. They get to the next paragraph. If there's evidence, they put it on their chart. So they're actually doing the reading and the recording at the same exact time. If that's something you think your kids are ever ready for, you absolutely can do it that way. There's not an incorrect way or a better way to introduce the step to you. We put it on separate days to give you the time to work with kids. But like I said, Marlene started doing it that way, and then she quickly determined, no, it's easier if we do it after each source. So absolutely trial and error, see what works with you and your students. So here's the first question I want to ask you based on this evidence, because what I'm seeing is teachers say, okay, we're recording the evidence, but now what? What do we do with it? So here's your first question. What connections or similarities can you find between pieces of evidence? So I want you to look down the list, and I want you to see, is there a piece of evidence in source 1 that really connects or is similar to a piece of evidence in source 2 or source 3? Like, which 2 paragraphs, what are the pieces of evidence? Or maybe you see 2 pieces of evidence within one source that are really about the same thing or connected or related to each other. So I'm going to give you some time to look through this list. I want you to use the chat function, and I want you to start recording in there where you see similarities between these pieces of evidence. Like paragraph 3 and paragraph whatever, right? So tell me. So source 1 and source 3 has something about being released or escaping slavery. So yes, paragraph 3 and paragraph 23 are both about either being released from slavery or escaping from slavery. Perfect. Oh, first to do all things. Yes. So 4, 15, and 21. They were the first African-American to do something. Yes. Oh, source 1 and source 2, they both fought for equal rights. So I think there's 4 pieces of evidence about that. Yes. 5 and 15 are 2 of the ones in source 1. Absolutely. Or no, that's source 1 and source 2. Perfect. Yes, exactly, you guys. Now, what I really love about this evidence that you guys are putting in here is that some of you are already giving it a characteristic. So you're saying that they were the first to do something, which is exactly what the evidence says, but then you called them a trailblazer. That's awesome, you guys, because that's actually the next step. So once you find the connections, then you have to teach kids to figure out what to call it or what characteristic that might go with, right? And that's the next thing that's pretty challenging. So that's why I want to walk you through it like one step at a time so that you can see exactly why we do what we do with this process. So you guys are already starting to kind of come up with those characteristics or those big ideas. So this is awesome. All right, so I'm going to show you an example of, actually, these are the first 2 that you guys put in the chat. So you see I color coded paragraph 3 and paragraph 23, both had to do with, you know, getting away from slavery. Then paragraphs 5, 7, 11, and 15 all have to do with fighting for rights or equal rights or something like that, right? So once kids are able to do this, now you have to figure out what to call it. Like Mandy and I were talking on the phone last night and we're like, how do we teach this? I literally say, well, what do we call that? Like their contribution to society wasn't that they escaped from slavery. Their characteristic as a history maker wasn't just that they escaped from slavery, but like, what does that mean? You know, what characteristic could we call that? The one about fighting for rights, like what do we call that? So I want to see some ideas in the chat. Okay, some of you have to go to duty, no problem. All right, for those of you who are still here with me, what characteristic or trait or quality might go with evidence from 3 and 23? So the fact that one escaped from slavery, one was released from slavery, think about that. Oh, a fighter. I love that. Yes. Unmute. Yes, go ahead.
Me, the person who wrote, sorry.
Oh, no. I didn't know if somebody had talked.
No.
risk taker, determination, perseverance, bravery. Yes, you guys, exactly. There's not one right answer. The idea is that we want our students to be able to critically think about the evidence and come up with their own big ideas. We don't want the big idea to come directly from the author of the text. They are drafting and composing their own response. They are the author of their response. So they have their own ideas, right? That's what really shows understanding of the topic and text. All right, so how about fighting for rights or being an advocate for equal rights? What kind of word describes a person who does that? And it might even be a phrase, not a word. So let's talk about that. What are some of your ideas in the chat? Fighter could work for this one. Advocate, oh, I love that. Change maker, love that. Activist. Change agent. And all of these are going to be determined on what kind of text you've studied with your kids already, right? Like if they've studied about trailblazers before, then that word's going to come to them. If you've talked about being a change agent in life or in class, then that's a word that might come to them. That's awesome. The idea is that we do not want every paper to sound the same. We don't want every kid's characteristic to be the same. We want them to really determine which ones speak to them, which ones mean something to them. What do they call that, right? Okay, so thank you for your responses. I'm going to move on, kind of show you for the sake of what we're doing. So, okay, I know this is a lot, you guys. Don't kill me for the colors, but I needed to somehow be able to visually show you on a slide. If you had done the entire thing with kids and they had found a ton of different connections, here's an example. Okay, now your class may come up with different words. Your class may find different connections. There's no one right way to do this. When I teach this with 6 periods in a day at middle school, every single class period's chart looks different, and that's okay. So the idea is that they were able to see that 2, 10, and 12 all were about education. So we made that characteristic SMART. Then you have, we did the freedom one. We had said strong. You guys came up with some other really good ones. We knew that 4, 11, and 13 were all about going to court, but like we couldn't really come up with a characteristic for that because it's not really a quality. So we're just gonna leave that there, come to it later. First, to do something, right? We had talked about that. That could be inspiring or inspirational. It could be trailblazer. I love that one. Any of those words. Fought for rights. You guys came up with some really good ones, but it may just be something simple as they stood up for others, right? I know that's not just a one-word characteristic, but it's still something to describe them. Then I had the long-lasting effect. So the idea that one wrote a famous speech, one improved lives, and one had islands named after him. I don't think these are the greatest pieces of evidence, but it does show that they're well-known or had a long-lasting effect. Then the ones in the blue, this is really where that third source, that York guy comes in, is that he was just really, really good at his job, right? So we're gonna make that skilled. Now, the other thing you see on this list is there's 4 pieces of evidence that I ended up crossing out. Here's why. We want students to know that not every piece of evidence they mark or they list is going to be helpful to them. And they may not know that when they're first recording it, but they're gonna figure it out. So the fact that Sojourner Truth changed her name, it's just not super important, and there's no other piece of evidence that really connects to it. So I'm gonna get rid of it. Process of elimination. Abolitionists. I know as I was reading that that's really important. It sounds super important, so I wrote it down. But now that I'm looking at all the evidence in one place, I don't see that word again. And truthfully, as a 4th or a 5th grader, I may have forgotten what it even means. So there's no reason for me to talk about it in my essay. I'm gonna cross it out. Then if you see in source 3, we had written down physical characteristics of York, that he was strong and tall, but we know now that's not really what we're focusing on. We don't need that. And then the last one was that he was in the freighting business. I don't even know what that is. I'm going to cross it out. I don't need it, right? So it's really just showing kids how to take all that evidence that they marked and start narrowing it down to really pick the most relevant, convincing evidence that they are able to support with elaboration. Okay, and you guys, you will have this PowerPoint in Canvas, so you'll be able to look at all this. All right.
Can I jump in just for a quick second?
Please, yes.
So
Marie.
one of the other things that we want to remind teachers is they are not just using these random texts to teach writing. One of the benefits here is that students have an opportunity to dig in and learn about 3 important African-American history makers. And so when kids have questions, so I want to make sure that teachers have a really clear understanding that they're teaching social studies in days 1 and 5 and pulling evidence. But when a student asks a question about what an abolitionist is, that's something that as a teacher, we want to provide resources for them to be able to understand. It's also really important that, that teachers and students have an understanding that, that the reason that we are studying the contributions of these individuals is not just for what they have done, but for who they are, and that these are all individuals with characteristics that students can admire and be inspired by. So just to be mindful of the fact that as Sharon's talking about, oh, this doesn't matter, she's not referring to the fact that it doesn't matter about the person, but in fact, it doesn't happen to be a detail that could be used in writing. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you,
Okay.
Marie.
Good.
Okay, so I know it's a lot so far. I'm going to give you a moment to kind of like think and process in a minute, but I want you to kind of really dig into what we're doing here and how we're making some of these decisions. So right now, we've identified a possible smart, strong, something about going to court, inspirational, stood up for others, they're well-known, and they're skilled. That's a lot of characteristics. I do not need, nor should I, talk about all of those things in my essay. Again, we are not writing a summary. So now, how are we going to decide which characteristics to focus on in our body paragraphs? Well, what do you need to do? You need to really think about the prompt. Which characteristics show that they contributed to history? Will you be able to use evidence from multiple sources? So you got to make sure that whichever characteristics you do choose to write about, it's coming from multiple sources. Then once you've made that decision, and we're going to go through each question separately, so don't worry, but once you've made that decision, then you need to determine which 2 or 3 pieces of evidence for each big idea will you use. And you can think about, well, what do I have to say about it? If I don't have any elaboration about it, then maybe it's something I shouldn't use in my essay because I have to have elaboration about every piece of evidence in my essay. So let's talk about each question independently. You see it there at the top. First, let's think about which characteristics show that they contributed to history, and let's eliminate those that don't. So think about this. So if you're looking at the fact that they were smart, right? They learned English, he wanted to learn, he studied law, right? Now, because he studied law, some other accomplishments happened that contributed to history, but just that he studied law and that she learned English isn't necessarily a strong characteristic to discuss as somebody who is a history maker, right? So I'm seeing somebody in the chat say first to do something. Absolutely. Stood up for others. Absolutely. Right? So what's really funny about that, Jillian and Nancy, are those are the 2 that I actually chose to write about. So you'll see that. But the idea is that you're actually able to, look, eliminate some of these characteristics, right? So went to court, we determined a long time ago that those were kind of meaningless pieces of evidence. The fact that they were smart or educated, not that it's meaningless, but we really got to focus on the really relevant, the really, really good stuff, right? Some of these other ones would probably work. In fact, any of the remaining ones could work as really strong body paragraphs. But funny enough, Jillian and Nancy, you guys actually picked the two that I picked just for the sake of today's training. So let's move on to that process. So another thing you might ask is, are you going to be able to use evidence from multiple sources? So what I did here was, out of my remaining characteristics or topics, I went through and I recorded which sources they were from. So you'll see right here that being strong by finding freedom was in sources 1 and 3. The being the first to do something, that's a good one because that was in all 3 sources. Like, that hardly ever happens, so that's really good. The standing up for others, that was in source 1 and 2. Being well known was in all 3 sources, but I'm not sure that's the strongest thing to talk about. And then being great at the job, that was in sources 2 and 3. So you guys, if you look at these 5 characteristics, there's not a single combination that's going to leave out a source. And that's awesome right there, you guys. That's what we want. We want to make sure that they are including evidence from at least 2 of the 3 sources, if not all 3, right? So for the sake of today, we went back to our prompt. We really thought about the characteristic of a history maker, somebody making important contributions. What we are going to determine is that these are going to be our 2 big ideas. The fact that they are inspiring or inspirational because they were the first to do something, and the fact that they stand up for others, they fought for rights, right? And we can see right here that we have these pieces of evidence to choose from for our essay. Now, I want to talk really quickly right here about why we're going to narrow this down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is 7 pieces of evidence. I don't need 7 pieces of evidence in a 4-paragraph essay. Again, this is a 120-minute drafted, timed piece of writing. I want to pick the most relevant ones. So for each big idea, I want 2 to 3 pieces. So for that first big idea, the purple one, that one's perfect. It's got all 3 people. It's my only one in source 3. So I'm actually going to use all 3 of those pieces of evidence in my first body paragraph. But that second one, I have 4 pieces from just 2 sources. I do not need those 4 pieces of evidence in those 2 sources. So this is kind of that one time where I need to go back to my text to determine which of those 4 pieces of evidence I think are the strongest. Okay, so I'm going to show this to you. Here is the first one. I've underlined those 2 pieces of evidence. She also worked for women's rights. She fought to persuade people that slavery was wrong and that women should have the same rights as men. You guys, one of those is clearly standing out as not only the longer one, but the much stronger piece of evidence. So we're going to pick the piece of evidence from paragraph 7. Let's look at the next one. Paragraph 11, you see that underlined piece of evidence, and then paragraph 15. He wanted to make the promise of equal rights for all come true. He worked to make equal rights the law in every community and state. So you can't go wrong with either of these, but I think the fact that he wanted to do it is less impactful than the fact that he did it, right? So again, I like that second piece of evidence in this source to use in my body paragraph. So here's what I just did. I decided these 2 pieces of evidence for my second body paragraph. All right, I want to stop. I want to give you some time to process, think about everything that we just did there. I know it seems like a lot. It looks like a lot just on the slide like this. Know that when I'm doing this with my students, I'm either under the Elmo or I'm on chart paper or I'm on the whiteboard, and we're working through the process together. We're crossing things out. We're really showing that process of elimination. We're doing lots of think alouds, lots of brainstorming, getting ideas from every kid in the class. Which one do you think is the strongest? Why? Which sentence do you like the best? Why? Which sentence do you have elaboration for, right? So really, really digging in and focusing on the idea that they need to show that they are in control of the evidence, not the evidence being in control of them and their writing. So I've had some questions regarding why all of our lessons have focused on picking 2 big ideas for 2 middle paragraphs, and why for each of those big ideas, we've really focused on just 2 or 3 pieces of evidence. Because I know I've talked to teachers, I've been in classrooms, and I know that a lot of kids really feel like they should be adding a lot more details from the text, or just kind of a list of details from the text. So let's talk about why we actually want them to be more specific and strategic about the details they include. So this is where I'm going to bring up some rubric language to respond to this question. Why did I only choose 2 characteristics to include in my response? I had like 5. They fight for others. They're well known. They're skilled at their jobs, right? Like, why only 2? Here is the wording from a 4 on evidence and elaboration on your rubric. Look specifically at the highlighted words. Effective use of sources, facts, and details. That does not mean all, right? Effective, meaning they have effectively picked which facts and details they are going to use in their explanation or in their opinion. Then the fact that the student is able to demonstrate an understanding of the topic in the text. So you are showing me that you understand the fact that fighting for rights and making it law, that's standing up for others. You are proving to me that you know the fact that they were the first African-American to do these things makes them an inspiration. That's not something that was ever stated in the text set. So that's automatically showing the scorer that you understand what you're being asked to do, and that you put critical thought into it, and that you did analysis and synthesis to come up with those big ideas. Okay, so that's the first answer. The second question I hear all the time is why only 2 or 3 pieces of evidence in each body paragraph? Again, looking at the rubric language, it says convincing support and evidence for the controlling idea. Convincing does not mean everything. Convincing does not mean 7 details. Convincing really means I looked at the 4 possible options and I picked the 2 that I thought were like the strongest. Relevant evidence integrated smoothly and thoroughly with references to sources. Again, I'm choosing the most relevant evidence, I'm integrating it within my response, and I'm including those citations to show reference and give credit to the author. Then I'm giving my elaboration to go with it. So these are a few of the questions that we've had come up while we're in schools and visiting with teachers. So we were hoping to kind of give some explanation behind why this step is the way that it is and why we narrow it down this far. All right, before I let Mandy take over to walk you through the last part of step 4 and step 5 and step 6, I am going to stop and allow you to process and think, and either unmute or add something in the chat that you want to say about what we've done so far.
You condense a tedious process into something that's pretty easy for the kids to be able to grapple with the information and then put it in an organized manner so it's not so overwhelming. Just a great process for them to be able to roll out for writing.
Awesome, thank you, Teresa. Is there anybody that has really like attempted this with students, or you've supported a teacher that's attempted this with students, and you've come up with some, you know, tricks for others in the room who maybe have been too hesitant to try, like Marlene shared with me in the transformation group? Remember, it's never too late to start. It's definitely going to take time, but Mandy, Philomena, and myself have all done this with students for years and years and years. And so we know we're proof that it can work, and we really, really believe in it. All right, Mandy, you want to take over for the rest of the steps?
Yes, ma'am. Hi, everyone. I'm Mandy. Okay, so we just finished the organizing our evidence portion of those 6 steps, and we're now going to move into the plan. So remember, Sharon mentioned that all kids get that planning sheet, and the idea is to teach them how to use it. So the organizing step, or the chart with the 3 columns, would have gone on one side of the planning sheet, and we'd like students to use the backside to plan. This is one example of a way to plan. When students get to secondary, they are really well versed in that BMME structure. We have introduced or shifted a little bit to use the language of the rubric, which is introduction, 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. So those letters in the corners of that plan are just IBBC to stand for those 4 paragraphs that they'll plan for in their essay. Before planning, we want to revisit the prompt just to ensure that we are keeping our purpose, focus, and organization directly related to what the prompt is asking. A word that you're going to hear a lot is control, right? We want students to have control of that information, and answering the prompt and sustaining their response in terms of the prompt demonstrates that they have control over the information or the text set in response to that prompt, which is part of that whole unpacking step, right? So when we revisit the prompt, we want to remind students that we are explaining. And then what is it that we are explaining? We're explaining the characteristics of African-American history makers who have made important contributions throughout history, and we will use pieces of that prompt language to construct our controlling idea. Here's an example of what the plan, when completed, may look like based on the big ideas that we chose from our organizing chart. Our first big idea was inspiring, and our second was stand up for others. So a controlling idea may sound like African-American history makers who have made important contributions throughout history are inspiring and stand up for others. So again, that idea of controlling idea, this is what I'm going to talk about throughout my entire essay. There's a line or an arrow pointing from the introduction to the conclusion box, just to remind students that that statement needs to be in both the introduction and the conclusion to then wrap their essay up. There are, different strategies to teach them how to write the conclusion statement or the wrap-up statement in that conclusion in a different way using the same words, but the basic idea should be stated in the introduction and then again in the conclusion. You can see in those body paragraph boxes that I'm not writing complete sentences. We just took the paragraph number and the words or phrases to remind us what it was that we would like to add in as our evidence, which evidence we selected.
Mandy, I'm going to stop right here and just talk about how, just like with unpacking and there being multiple methods, it can be the same for planning. So if there has been, something else you've asked your students to include on their plan, and it's something they're really used to and really good at, then there's no reason that you would need to change that. So for example, and I'm going to totally be transparent, that when I first started teaching writing, I used to have my kids plan their hook and plan all their commentary and elaboration and plan it all and write it all in here. And I quickly determined that they were wasting all of their 120 minutes worrying about these 4 boxes, and that in the end, that wasn't going to give them the score. So I really kind of like came back from that, and I started just talking them into a super brief plan that doesn't necessarily include all of that really creative, crafty stuff for their writing, because my hope is that if they can get the basics, if they can get the foundation down, they can add in that craft, that voice, those hooks, that really strong elaboration in as they go. And typically, when you are trying to think of original thought or elaboration, doing it in isolation in this box may be more difficult than it is when you're actually writing the evidence and then kind of coming up with the thoughts as you write. So again, if your kids include other things in their plan and it's working for them, by all means, keep doing it. This is not the only, correct way to plan.
All right, this is the point where we would want to revisit our brainstorm responses in hopes that students can make connections between the evidence and ideas that were chosen for the essay and what they already knew before they read the text set. So remember that original thought is key when we're thinking about elaboration and insight. So we want to encourage students to revisit their lists of information that they knew or thought or felt about the topic before they read the text set. Sometimes students are really skilled in, paraphrasing the author's words or extending what the author has said about the particular African-American history makers that we read about. And if there is no original thought, then that's when we're going to run into trouble with copy scores. Even if they're very skillfully paraphrasing or putting the author's words into their own, if there aren't any connections or personal connections there, then they're going to be lacking that original thought, because at that point, it's not their own thoughts, it's the author's thoughts that they're putting into their own words, and that doesn't qualify as an original thought. So before writing or during writing, we may want students to, we do want students to go back to that brainstorm list to see if there's anything on there that they could use as elaboration while they're writing their body paragraphs. You can see the highlighted sections there about Martin Luther King Jr. It said he fought for the freedom of others. That also goes along with pieces of evidence that we chose for standing up for others. Rosa Parks was brave for not giving up her seat on the bus. That may qualify as inspirational. It could be she's standing up for others by setting an example. Kamala Harris, the first African-American woman vice president, or the first woman vice president ever, which could also qualify for either one of those big ideas, standing up for others as being an example. She fought, she didn't give up. She is inspirational to others, to other people for, chasing their dreams, reaching their dreams, for, millions of little girls who now see themselves in a woman in the highest national office. So we're just trying to get students to make those connections between the evidence they found in the text set and what they originally thought before they read it. Step 5 of the 6 steps is to then write that essay. So write an IBBC, or introduction to body paragraphs, and that conclusion. This is a sample essay using the plan and evidence that we chose. Do I have a volunteer to read aloud?
I can do it if you'd like.
Thank you,
so much.
Christina.
No problem. As we celebrate Black History Month, there are many African Americans to honor for making history. African American history makers who have made important contributions throughout history are inspiring and stand up for others. To begin, African American history makers are inspiring. One way African Americans are inspiring is because they were the first to do something. For example, Source One about Sojourner Truth says she became the first African American woman to win a lawsuit in the United States. This makes me think of what happened the other day when Kamala Harris officially became the first African American woman vice president. She made history that day, and that gives me hope that one day maybe a woman could be the president. Another African American who was inspiring is Thurgood Marshall, because he was chosen to be a judge on the US Supreme Court in 1967. According to Source 2, Marshall was the first African American judge on the US Supreme Court. The other day we read about President Obama, and he also made history by being the first African American president. So both of these men are an inspiration to others. A man named York was inspiring because he helped on an important journey in 1804. Source 3 states, York was the only African American member of the Lewis and Clark expedition. I wonder if he felt like he didn't belong. Jackie Robinson, the first African American baseball player, was also in a group of all white men when he started. People who were the first African American to do something are inspiring to others because they made it possible for others to follow in their path. Additionally, African American history maker stands up for others. Source 1 describes how Sojourner Truth made a difference. For example, she fought to persuade people that slavery was wrong and that women should have the same rights as men. This must have been really hard. I can't imagine not being able to do the same things as boys, like being able to play sports. Another African American who stood up for others was Thurgood Marshall. In Source 2, it explains, he worked to make equal rights the law in every community and state. In other words, Marshall must be the reason it's against the law to treat people unfairly. A law is much better than a rule because most people don't want to go to jail, so they follow laws. Standing up for others is just another characteristic of African American history makers. In conclusion, African American history makers are inspiring and they stand up for others. Sojourner Truth, Thurgood Marshall, and York are three important African Americans who made important contributions throughout history.
Thank you, Christina.
You're welcome.
All right, so I'm going to give you a few minutes and I'd like you to review these questions. I want you to think about the controlling idea. What was it? Where was it? Did the student give at least two big ideas to support their controlling idea? Was the response organized into multiple paragraphs? Did you see transitions, topic sentences? Did the response include cited textual evidence? Was there evidence from multiple sources? And did the response include elaboration or original thought? So I want you to think, and then when you start to, just want you to think for a moment. All right, we're now going to look at where those items are within this sample essay. So you can see there on the left, there's a key. The controlling idea is highlighted in green. And if you think back to the IBBC plan, remember that arrow where we asked students to draw the arrow from the introduction box to the conclusion box, because that was a reminder to put that statement or a similar statement in both the introduction and the conclusion. You could see there is green in both that intro and the conclusion. Our evidence is highlighted in yellow. The elaboration for each piece of evidence is highlighted in blue. Did this writer use citations? Yes, we can see source 1, we can see quotation marks to indicate direct quotes. We can see the source numbers for each. We see words like states, explains, according to, source 1 says. So all of those indicate references to sources, which if you remember back to the rubric is required for that evidence and elaboration box. You can also hopefully see where those connections from that brainstorming step came into play in our elaboration. So right underneath that first piece of evidence about Sojourner Truth, it says, this made me think about what happened the other day when Kamala Harris officially became the first African-American woman vice president. That's something from the brainstorming list that students would have come up with before reading the text set that had you know, she wasn't mentioned in any of the text sets that they read, but we referenced that brainstorming list and made a connection between something that she did. She was the first to do something, as was Sojourner Truth, and that qualifies as original thought. Same goes for that elaboration piece about Jackie Robinson. Down below where it says source 3 states York was the only African-American member of the Lewis and Clark expedition. So just an example of how that brainstorming step is important and can be extremely useful in ensuring that original thought is present when students are elaborating on evidence and not just being repetitive about what the author in the text is saying.
Thank you, Mandy. So just to wrap up, we have just about 5 minutes before you guys have a quick 5-minute break and head into your collaboration sessions. But that last step, remember, is just that revision and edit, really teaching kids to use the last 5 minutes of their time left to reread what they've written, make any possible corrections they can make, especially to those capital letters, punctuation, spelling of words from the text and things like that. So to wrap up our session today, I hope you guys really enjoyed what we did, walking you through those 6 steps, again, with a different kind of lens, with a different prompt, with a different text set. Know that that is the 5th grade unit that will be coming out in Canvas in a few weeks for the last 2 weeks of February. You will be able to access this PowerPoint, the sample essay, and resources on Canvas. So really excited about that. I want to end today with you guys taking note of this. I will put this in tomorrow's newsletter on the Academic Services Notebook, but please feel free to share with your teachers that we will have an FSA rubric and scoring training for grades 4 and 5. We'll start with 3 courses. They will be 3 hours long. They will all be on Zoom. I think they're kind of capped at 120 people. But know that my plan is to record that session and then to just kind of link that recording in Canvas. Now, here's the thing with that is that then there's not really any kind of validation or any way for me to prove who watched that video. So if you attend the PDS course on one of these dates, you will absolutely get your 3 points. But if for some reason you aren't able to attend one of these courses or you can't get into one of these courses, you will still have access to the session. It just would be without points at that point. If I feel like I have enough people that are just really adamant about getting the points, then I will try to offer some additional sessions there in mid-February if possible. But let's start with this and see kind of what the outcome is. So please write down those course numbers, those dates, those times. Encourage your 4th and 5th grade teachers to register. They're already in PDS. And like I said, I'll put this in the newsletter tomorrow as well. Here is that survey again. I saw some of you answer the questions in the chat, so thank you for that. If you still weren't able to get to the survey, remember, it's just kind of shoot me an email. Are you guys doing mid-year for all 4 grades? And what would you like to hear us talk about or go over in the February coach meeting regarding writing specifically? And then you guys, that was it. So thank you so much for sticking with us this afternoon and going to duty and coming back and all of those good things. We really, really appreciate it. I will upload this recording to Canvas and the PowerPoint and the resources. If you have questions, you guys, you know, you can email me, reach out to Mandy, Philomena, myself. We are so happy to continue getting to know you guys through this virtual world that we're in, unfortunately. So thank you so much. Training, is the training different? Diana, so it's different in that it's not the Moodle that Tamisha had created for scoring, but it is going to be super similar in the fact that it will focus on the FSA rubric and it will focus on the scoring sampler set from the state of Florida. So it really will be the same essays that they're kind of reading through, the annotations, the scoring, but it just will be live on Zoom rather than on the Moodle. So yes, if you took Tamisha's Moodle on scoring, unless you just want a refresher, it's not going to be anything drastically new or different.
Okay, thank you. So this will be really good for like new to the grade level. Like I have a brand new 4th grade teacher. She will definitely need it.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. It's perfect for those people for sure. I know you guys are all at the end of your day. Some of you have district coaches to go meet with. I can stay on here if any of you need to stay and ask me questions. If not, you guys, thank you so much for joining us. And I can't wait to see you.